I've been working with Arramara for the last 10 years part-timer. In the factory itself there are approximately 15 people employed on the factory floor. There are 10 here in the office behind the scenes, and then around the coast we have 100 self-employed cutters that supply Arramara with seaweed. Well, hopefully, because we're owned by a multinational company that is well respected throughout the world, I could see Acadian Seaplants putting Arramara and Connemara on the world map in the line of seaweed and seaweed production. Well, our produce is sold all over the world. Canada, America, Australia, England. A lot of the product is sold here locally in Ireland, Germany, France, and all over Europe, anywhere in the world really.
Down agus puir me férin eloini o wachel des agus ced a poke on a lana yeshin no floor na var Leaner on a
Now, Paddy, 1961 you said was the first year.
1960.
And tell me about that first day. Have you memories of the first day? Now, of course, you might have been back with your father prior to that, were you?
Oh, I was.
Yeah.
I was back with my father very much because he had cancer.
Yeah.
And he was sick for a long time with the cancer.
Yeah.
And I used to drive him around. And another thing was, he wasn't able to take if he got a puncture or anything like that, he wasn't able to take the wheel off. So I stayed with him and I used to drive around. And I often remember driving him to Kilkerran. And when we come to Clancy's, he'd say to me, Paddy, he said, give me the wheel now, I'll drive down to the factory.
So he'd be seen
No, Tommy
driving,
Clancy's,
yeah.
And
tell me, Paddy, so your father had an involvement with Arramara before you joined Arramara?
Oh, he had.
What was that involvement, Paddy?
He was there. He was doing the same as I was doing. He was doing the sea rods and doing the...
Buying?
There wasn't much seaweed bought before he joined it.
Yeah.
But he was in he done all the carriageen. I never done carriageen much. I done carriageen here locally. We were here only... The first year we were here in 1949. He bought me a Bedford truck.
Yeah.
I was only 14. And he sent me off, going around to the houses after the spring tide.
Collecting the carriageens, yeah.
Buying the carriageen.
Now, did Arramara deal in carriageen at any time?
They did. They were dealing in carriageen at that time.
Yeah.
And
So your father would have been connected to Arramara because of the carriageen as well?
Yeah.
And where was that carriageen going from Arramara?
It was going to... a lot of it went to the breweries at that time.
Right.
A lot of it went to the drug companies.
Yeah.
And a crowd in England, Gridleys.
Ridley's.
Gridleys, G-R-I-D-L-E-S, that's Gridleys.
And what were they into, food?
I don't know what they were, but I know that we used to write labels,
Yeah.
and Gridley was one of them.
Yeah.
And calico printers,
Yeah.
whatever they were.
Yeah.
They bought an amount of, because we used to write an awful lot of labels for calico printers.
Calico.
Calico printers.
Printers.
Printers, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That must be printers.
So that was your father's introduction or involvement with Arramara
Cor-
as a buyer, as a man that was dealing on the ground with harvesters.
Yeah, he seemed to go, you see, he was at that, and then he was at the sea rods. Them were the two main things they were at that time, was the Corrigan and the sea rods.
And the Corrigan was coming from West Clare here or from Connemara?
Corrigan was going from all the west coast and all the islands.
Yeah. What about Kerry, Paddy? Can you remember being
I
down
can-
in Kerry?
I can.
Yeah.
When I joined Arramara, they said to me, they wanted all the weed they could get. And they said to me, Paddy, you might have a go at Kerry. Now, my father often had a go at Kerry. I often went down with him to see would he get anything from Kerry. No. So I said I'd go down to be sure. So I started off and down to Ballybunion, Venus, down along. I went into all the ins and outs and into Castle Gregory. I thought I'd do well in Castle Gregory. But the whole thing was they had a co-op,
Down
a vegetable co-op. A vegetable co-op down in Kerry, in Castle Gregory, where they're doing the onions and they were doing the
Agricultural produce.
all that
Yeah.
stuff. And that was their main thing.
Yeah.
And even when they were on the shore, like, they'd be using the seaweed for the ground because
Yeah.
it's a very sandy ground
Sure.
around.
Yeah.
And they used to call the sea rods bastoons because I think it's when they'd be taking up a fork of the weed, the sea rod, they got caught in it, and you know.
Yeah, yeah. A
And
bastard,
yeah. So
They called them Budoggy up on Tory Island in Donegal.
so when they went short of, I remember them going short of sea rods one time, and what they went for then was the laminari weed, you know, the belty
I
weed.
do, yeah.
Yeah, and I bought that for them as well, and I bought it in different places. And to buy that in Clare, the name of it in Clare was Lerrick. The name of it in Galway was Cowlock.
Corlock, yeah.
The name
And
of it in,
Lerrick in Clare.
the name of it in Mayo was Schlamogs.
Yeah,
The name of it in Sligo was Rack.
yeah.
And the name of it in Donegal was Black La.
Black
Black La.
La.
Black La.
Yeah.
So you had all them
Different names.
different names, for the local names, like, you know.
Yeah.
And,
That in a way would show you how ancient or how far back the tradition of seaweed was.
Yeah.
What
No
were the
matter.
big changes you've seen, Paddy? You mentioned now the dryer initially, the small one. That was in the 60s, going more
big-
weed.
the big dryer
What
then
were the
was-
biggest changes that you've seen, say, going from the 60s
Well,
into
the
70s?
big dryer they put in, you know, the big dryer where they done the washing plant and up on the belt, and everything was kind of nearly automatic.
Yeah,
That the weed was being washed, dropped onto a belt. The belt was taking the weed and into the dryer. It was out of that, and the mead was into the hopper and into the ton bag.
so you were increasing the quality and the quantity.
And you were cutting out the labour. The only thing that had affected us rightly was the storm.
Yeah,
Storm. That if the weed was cut, it could scatter the storm and the high tide.
okay.
It scattered the tide, or tackled the ropes to get loose. And
Yeah.
time we're building the seaweed factory. And my mother said that she often saw big boats into Kilkerran. And that's how the factory came to Kilkerran.
And your mother's advice.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Well, of course, I was reared here in Dunlow and very familiar with Arramara and the jobs that they provided, both for those who were cutting rack and those who were processing the rack into meal in the factory just down behind us. And I recall when I was a young lad in the late 50s going to Kilkerran with my father, who took down samples of the meal. That's my only recollection. What happened afterwards, I'm not too sure. But obviously they were interested in establishing here in Dunlow. And in 1968, of course, the factory was established and created much needed jobs for those who were cutting and saving the rack and for the many who were working in the factory. I became to realise that the harvesting of rack was a very difficult job. And a lot of people who were harvesting may not have been at it full time. They would have been in receipt of social welfare. But if their income was to be taken into consideration, then there would be no advantage to them to harvest the rack. So I convinced the Department of Finance in my time that we should introduce an amendment to the finance bill at the time and exempt those who were cutting rack from including it as an income. And I had included at that time as well, Nati Nageltakta. Why should they be involved in providing facilities for students, and at the same time either they or their husbands would lose? So I convinced them, and also the other one was those who were doing the hand knits, they were excluded as well. And as far as I'm concerned, that's still the situation. New wine Grodini as an Clár Leon and the Rothan cur Faisnéise Jahagan Morrigan Chin. Hvis det checked o gach Karen den Costa o Kyan Malin Guji and Jeskirch agus Arnoia Mayo Hui. So the Arramara fear hawked on the Dini Shin agus curry fostic their filed on the Ketadini a big bunch na famina agus Arnoia and Erichantini a big gobber San Morrigan. So the Enyam Arramara na famna agus Irhergunanal Fitchafucha.
Yeah. Seamus, we're pretty much near, maybe now, midstream here in the bay, are we?
We're about the centre of the bay. Yeah, the town on my right is one extremity, and then Inishfree Island is the next one. So we're midway.
One of Inishfrees. Are the two Inishfrees close by?
No, you have Inishfree here, which is an inshore island. It's just off between Dunlow and Burton Port, and the other Inishfree is close to Gola.
To Gola, okay. So tell me what we have here now, Seamus. What are we looking at in terms of importance to the seaweed world of Arramara in the late 60s, 70s and on towards?
Well, this would have been one of our main draw points. The seaweed or the slipway rather, was in the beginning it was just an old track coming down. The seaweed was landed on just mud and stones, and when you come to lift it with the grabs and the tractors, it's impossible to pick the seaweed off it clean. So by putting down a nice bed of concrete and that, the seaweed was clean. It landed in a clean area, and it allowed the lorries to drive right down to the very end and get it. And the other point as well, that being in the centre, and you have the prevailing winds coming from the southwest, and you have the tide coming in that direction, the harvester could then decide where he wanted to tow seaweed to, which slipway he wanted to use, and that was why we have a network of about 10 of these slipways right around this Dunlow Bay, which is great.
Brilliant. So therefore, tide, prevailing winds and location was important, because what we have here is a bay or a large estuary. A bay. A
bay would be a closer thing, yeah, a bay, and there's quite a heavy crop of seaweed growing right around the bay.
Yeah.
And you know, that's important, I think, to be right in the middle of that as well.
Yeah. So seaweed, tell me the months, tell me the times that were best suited for the harvesting and the landing, etc., etc.
Well, I could probably make it easier to say that the worst, we had two very poor months for collection, and one of them would have been May. May was a bad month, and September was also a pretty poor month for getting the volumes we needed. And the month of May was when the people were in the bog. The bog was turf was also a very important crop for the people of the area. And the seaweed harvester had to have his fire, so he stopped cutting seaweed and he went to the bog instead. And then and do other setting of crops and so on. In September then he had to bring the turf home, and he had to dig his spuds and save the hay. So they had other jobs to do. So that was all the other months were fairly good.
What's that?
You see, the one thing the seaweed plant likes is a fast flowing current, and that's important for bringing the nutrients into it as well. And you know, yeah, the fast flowing current was the big thing for the seaweed.
Tell me now, where are we?
We're on what the locals would call Bradge Strand. It's beside the airport. The Donegal airport is over here just to our right, and that's where we are.
Yeah. And what we have here is a whole network of stones that were placed on the sand so that seaweed could grow.
This was done, I think, hundreds of years ago. I don't know when exactly it would have been done, but they were put out. Now you can see up here, if we had a higher area to look at it, you could see where the tracks were, each plot, and there was an opening through them. I would suggest it was to allow a horse and cart to travel in and out. So, and everybody had their own plot, and they claimed ownership very vigorously at the time. But no, it was good. And then while they were waiting for the seaweed to grow on the stone, they would have to come back and maybe once or twice a year get a shovel or a grape and prise the rock up so that it didn't sink into the sand. Now, as the seaweed grew, then the seaweed added a bit of buoyancy to the stone, and it kept it above the level of the sand, and that allowed the seaweed to grow quite freely on it. So
what length have we here, Seamus?
Well, you probably have up, a metre and a half, couple, depends on which plot you would lift, I mean, the tail end of it is away down here somewhere, and that's good clean asco.
Yeah.
Not a small little bit of fucus, that's all.
Yeah.
But it's mostly good clean asco.
Is bhí híl Arramara teoranta agus údarás na Gaeltachta. Will tú get a Lord fin role a bhí agus beidir atá agus a bhéis? Yeah.
Well, tá tinscal na feminine Harbh táhachtach gan na cantrach I Gaeltachta go cantar Connemara a go háirithe agus tá sé táhachtach san am láthir agus speise níos táhachtaí fós sa táchaí. So mar sin tá an bunclach láidir atá leacaí ag Arramara ó bunaíocha I 1947 go bhfuil próseáil feminine siúl I gantrach I Gaeltachta ón am sinna le Harbh táhachtach agus muid breannach I cín go rigmuid gur achmhainn sin a bhí mar buntáiste gan na banteoirí feminine gan na daoine a bhí gobars na monachanna ag Arramara an monachan a bhí fáca ag Arramara deire I gCill Chiaran an cheann a ghlach údarás na Gaeltachta nún go lua tar éis 2004 na mar sin gur ghlach údarás na Gaeltachta nún sin agus an sin ag tuiscint gur go leor féidireachtaí an sin na féidireachtaí amháin leis an airnal garam go neach an túdarás tóir in eisteoir a bheitchan an a heachtaseach leis an capital agus leis an sainneolalas agus lena sciliní agus leis an cruamach targaí agus margaí le go bhhétaí an tionscail sin thuirt go dtí 100 meile agus is sin a tháinig Acadian an drám as Nova Scotia I cheana Arramara go harta Jimlí an na níos sin.
Well, tarnói tá an arú tecaí an tionscail lá na blianta tosa mar dúirtú 1947. Tá arú mhór tecaínis tá ólaíocht agus go leor ní chéile gceist. Cá bhecinn tú róla an údarás amach anseo agus cá bhecinn tú go dibhinn Arramara a gulinn cíns na blianta tarún?
Well, tá an táir an údarás agus muid a chuid an airnal garam agus Ferbert achmaní na farige lárnach an stratéis. Gúil cólachtaí cosú le Arramara a gobar a bartin ar léin. Mar a cólachtaí eiles na cantrach I Gaeltachta le tá déile leis an réimse seo. Ach tá sé iontach go bhfuil drám mar Arramara a bhfuil cólacht cosú le Acadian ar gúil a higginn san ólaíocht a higgins san bailach le gal man taid agus ferbert, higgins san bailach le bres locha a chur le tarigi, agus gomisha sin lárnach, agus muide I ggéire seo thuirtcin cín tá tugraí cos le Parc na Mara, a bheits bunithe go mór timpeall ar tionscail na Fámaine, agus a ríist nuair atá cólachtaí mar Arramara, a bhfuil an taithí agus an sainneolalas acab in san airnal, go mbeidh sé a bhaid ní séas go rinne, buntáiste, a thuile buntáiste gon réigiún Gaeltachta a bhaint amach as an airnal seo dá bhhair sin.
Michael, the role and the connection between Údarás na Gaeltachta and Arramara over the years?
Arramara has been a very important company for the Connemara region and indeed in the past for regions such as Donegal, in as much as it was the first time that there was a commercialization of seaweed, and that seaweed cutters, small farmers, small fishermen along the west coast were able to supplement their income in a very important way through harvesting of seaweed and having a local factory that was able to take that seaweed and process it and send it off into international markets. And that's developed over the years. Údarás na Gaeltachta itself bought Arramara from Rin na Gaeltachta in the early 2000s and operated it as a going concern for a while, but knew that it was very important that we'd be able to attract capital and expertise with regard to the sector around Arramara in order to ensure that the full potential of the project could be attained for the Gaeltacht regions. And we were fortunate to be able to enter into a partnership with Acadian Sea Plants, who had the necessary experience with regard to research, development, innovation, added value products and access to markets. And Arramara, along with the other seaweed processing companies that we're fortunate now to have in the Gaeltacht region, are central and will continue to be central to our strategy to bring about sustainable development in Ireland's Gaeltacht regions over the coming years.
Tainagajin shisidim enores minim neregoralo Schnacht sheti gosegayarachor